to their offspring. And this is done through property called heredity. Now, from Adam to Noah, we have 10 generations. Now, we have a gene pool that's kind of like, I would say, 10 deep or 10 wide. That means that every son or daughter that comes from Noah is not only taking the characteristics of Adam and Eve, but they're also taking characteristics from Adam and Shem and Enos and all the other individuals in Adam's bloodline. Do you see what I'm saying? The reason why the gene pool has to be kind of wide is because there are so many personality traits and variations of character that needed to be in the human family. So it's like you're trying to make you're in the kitchen and you're trying to cook something up, or you're in a laboratory and you're trying to make something, and you have to have a certain amount of ingredients in order to be able to produce what you want. So God knew that in 2003 he needed to have Arthur here, and he needed to have a Vivian, he needed to have a Shelley, he needed to have Scott. But before he could have Scott, he had to have all the mixture at his disposal before he put Adam or DNA together. So now what we're looking at here is that we have 20, I believe that the 20 patriarchs that we see in Genesis chapter 5 and also in Genesis chapter 11 represent the 20 proteins. And I'll tell you why. Because Jacob comes, let's notice here, on verse 27 of Genesis chapter 11, it says, "Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran begat Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, Ur of the Chaldees." Let me go on down to verse 31. It says, "And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot, the son of Haran his sons, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them unto Ur of the Chaldees, to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran, and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died." Now it goes on down later, we know that Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob. So from the time we get from Shem, I'm just going to do it like this. We have 22, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Jacob down here. Jacob is way down here. Jacob is down here at number 22. Abraham would have been number 20. Now this is interesting because there are 22 characters in the Hebrew alphabet, and there are also 22 chromosomes that go for the entire coding of the human body, remember? There are 22 chromosomes from which the human body is made. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. Now Jacob, there's an interesting story about Jacob in the book of Genesis. Let's go there and read that real quick. If you ever want to do a really interesting study and how that ties in with this book, I'm going to go on and show what happened in Jacob's generation.
You said chapter 22?
We're on Jacob's dream and Jacob's ladder. All right, here we are in chapter 28, verse 10. Basically, Jacob. Now, Jacob's name means twister. He was the one that we know he's the one that stole he stole Esau's birthright, or he usurped it. In verse 10 it says, "And Jacob went from Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night. And because the sun was set, he took of the stones of that place and put them for his pillows and laid down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth. At the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on that ladder. And because the Lord stood above it, Yeah, and behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac, the land where thou liest, of these will I give it, and to thy seed. So he says, to the land where thou liest, I'm going to give it to you and your seed. Another interesting thing about Jacob, outside of this ladder, I believe that Jacob's ladder represents, this is kind of like a crude form of the double helix molecule, the DNA. Because each one of these generations, even though we see them in terms of real human beings, what the scientists see when they look at the DNA molecule under the microscope, they see the exact same structure in our cells as we see in the Bible through the generations. Let me say that again. There is a pattern of genealogy in the Bible that matches perfectly what scientists have discovered down to the last few years under their microscopes. They see 20 proteins, and out of those 20 proteins, you get every amino acid that goes to make up every component of the human body, 20 of them. These 20 amino acids have to be bound to 4 bases. And I'm going to show you the 4 bases out of the book of Numbers, chapter 2, in a few minutes. But what I want to show you is something that's really interesting. I believe that Jacob's ladder is kind of an interesting parallel to the structure of the DNA molecule. Each one of these represents a protein. It represents one of the gene rations. It represents one of the set of coded instructions that goes to make up the entire human family. But for some reason, when we see the actual structure of the DNA molecule, it does have a ladder-like structure, but for some reason it's twisted. Did you guys notice when we looked at this pattern? It's twisted, isn't it? Anyone care to hazard a guess as why it may be twisted and why it may be twisted down here at the 22nd pair? Jacob himself was twisted. I'm trying to paint you a picture that the reason why the DNA molecule is twisted, the reason why God cuts off the whole thing at 22 is because God represents himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If we want to look at an interesting parallel, every word that was uttered to the Hebrews in their generation was a combination of 22 letters taken in combinations of maybe 4, 5, or 6 at a time. You understand what I'm saying? You may have a 5-letter word. You can put those letters in any order you want to. But our entire system of communication in the Old Testament was based upon 22 characters. It's just interesting to me that the genetic alphabet that causes the macromolecules to come together and form the amino acids and the proteins that go on to form cells, that go on to form larger organisms, they also had to be spoken to by a very specific code. And it was interesting to me that this code also contains 22 characters. Is it possible that God is speaking to us through the Bible that most of the world looks at as just an old archaic document that gives historical information that may or may not be accurate? I believe that by the time this book is finished written and published, with all the diagrams and all the genealogies, with all the parallels and all the matches, that it's going to be conclusive evidence that there is a divine hand behind Genesis, the gene rations of Adam. But we're going to get into something really interesting. Now I said Jacob's name, his name means the twister, okay? Twister. If you ever look at the DNA molecule and compare it to the sign of the AMA, American Medical Association, it's got 2 coiled serpents. And the shape of the DNA molecule is exactly as the shape of those 2 coiled serpents around around the pole. That pole, the scientists call it a spindle. It's a pole that separates the 2 halves of the DNA molecule. But on this page, I'm going to show that you have 20 amino acids. How how many of you are even basically familiar with acids and bases? How they kind of cancel each other out. I'm going to show you something. The simplest acid-base pair is hydrogen oxygen, H2O.